because you believe it. Did he mean he prophesied it? No. He caused you to do it, ultimately. Or he opened the door for the enemy to come and do it to you eventually. That's not prophecy. That's curse. A prophecy is naturalism is going to come. A prophecy is uniformity is going to come. I mean, who thought of uniformity? I mean, come on. I mean, how would Peter possibly think of that? How could he know that kind of detail? He can only know it from somebody who's outside of time, who knows the beginning from the end. Hutton's word says this, again, no powers are to be employed that are not natural to the globe. In other words, unless it's natural laws, it has no place. Don't even consider it. Naturalism. It's what it is. Geologic catastrophism. Uniformity led to the rejection of Noah's flood. They deliberately forget by these waters also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. Hutton said the buried shell bed are explained as legacies, not of the flood, but of subsidence and renewed uplift. I don't know about you. I really seriously wonder how much those in the church who are so committed to an old earth have really understood this passage. And it's one thing, I think Genesis is, I'm dogmatic about it. I think it's absolutely clear. Morning and evening to day one can only mean one thing. Yom can mean an age. So what? What does one mean when you put it with Yom? What does morning and evening day one mean when you put it with Yom? What did Moses' audience think it would mean? Not what do I think it means, because I grew up in evolution and that's still in my thought process. And it's never been purged out. It's never been transformed. My mind's never been renewed to think in a biblical worldview. Again, I'm not, these guys aren't my enemies, by the way, and I don't consider them. Most of them are brothers. I consider them that. But I believe it's deception. And I believe it harms the church dramatically. And I believe we've lost almost all influence in the world because we have completely abandoned the philosophic arguments that we need to be making. We don't have any. They don't want to hear what we have to say. And we have to get back to the point where we're having some influence. God's going to have to do that. These are just some pictures of floods. These are just little local floods, by the way. That's a ship that was carried a mile inland by a tsunami, a big ship, not a little one. It wasn't just water that happened on the flood. I believe the earth was shattered. The crust, the mantle was broken. Volcanic activity began happening all around the earth. It was a massive event. You've probably heard of Mount St. Helens and the things that took place during that. But if you actually look at all of just what happens in just one event like that, and you take that over the entire face of the earth for 350 days, and then later on, it wasn't just that. It's not like there was just one event in history. In the days of Peleg, the land divided, basically. That's what Peleg means. The Pangaea was broken apart, the one landmass. That happened when God divided the language. So you see the things that Hutton observed, the more than one, the counter layers of strata that were obviously turned on sideways. And he said, well, this had to be happening for a long time. No, it just happened to be more than one event. Again, it's a bad thing when you make assumptions. Right? I'm not going to say what that means, but you've all heard it. All right, fourth prophecy. Rejection of a future judgment. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. Ultimately, Peter prophesied that they would reject future judgment, which is absolutely at the foundation, at the very heart of all rejection of God. I don't want to be judged by this being. He can't exist. We criticize, if you've ever read Dawkins' books, which I don't really recommend, but if you have read them, you know how vicious he is in his attacks of the God of the Old Testament. And it's just absolutely astounding the things that God allowed him to say and not strike him dead, you know. And I'm glad he didn't, you know, because God's merciful, and I'm glad God is merciful. Of course, Mussolini said the same thing, didn't he? If there is a God, let him strike me dead. And when God didn't strike him dead, he said, well, I must be right. God just waited a while before he answered that prayer, you know. And Hitler, if you remember Mussolini's death, it was extremely violent and, you know, distasteful. The point of it is, of course, is that, you know, God is merciful, but he is going to judge. Hutton and Lyell developed their theory to counter prevailing belief in the Noahic flood. It was just fundamental to everything they wanted to do. According to the Bible, the flood occurred because of mankind's behavior. That's why God did it. And I've heard estimates of, you know, millions to billions of people that died in the flood. It's a tremendously horrendous event. The implication of future judgment is removed if there is no creator to judge, or that the flood was not a judgment. How many of you ever saw the movie Evan Almighty? A few of you have. Most of you may not go to movies, I don't know. I didn't go when I was in the Baptist church. But I've seen this movie, and it's an interesting movie. There was another one, actually, that was Bruce Almighty. Now, they're both, I like them both. And if that offends you, I'm sorry. But Bruce Almighty has some great theology in it. I mean, it really does. There's some great things he says in there. It's, you know, Bruce has the powers of God to, you know, to do what he wants, and he's trying to get his girlfriend to love him, and he goes, love me, and tries to pull her into all this stuff, and, you know, she looks at him and says, I did, and walks away. And God shows up, and he says, well, how did he say it? He says, what do you do to get somebody to love you without violating free will? And God says, well, welcome to my world. And that's a reality. And that's why the world is the way it is. God allows people to do things. He allows us to make decisions. But those decisions have consequences. And his whole plan is to redeem and restore. And that's our mission, of course. And Evan Almighty, the reason I brought that up, of course, is Evan is now Moses, and there's a flood, and, you know, he saves this community from this flood and builds an ark and does all this stuff. And in the end, the author says, well, people misunderstand the flood. It wasn't about judgment. It's like, I'm going, yes, it was. The thoughts and intents of man's heart were evil continually. From the beginning to the end, it was always evil.